Screen's for you if you want.
Oh, okay.
All right. Well, I'd like to thank everyone for coming here today to the CCP seminar. Today we've got our own Jan, who's going to be talking to us about a topic that's near and dear to some of our hearts, and that is about sugar-sweetened beverages. And so I'd like to, very happy to have you talking about this. I'm sure it'll be a great discussion we have around this as well. And I just want to add my 2 cents worth, if I may. My family is very sad not to be facing the sugar option at the end of the aisles.
Okay, all right. Well, thanks for that introduction, Sean. For those of you that don't know me, I'm Jan. I'm a 4th year PhD student in Eco, and this work is done jointly with my supervisors, Farasat and Stefan, who are both here today. And hopefully the title is fairly self-explanatory. Has the ban on selling sugar-sweetened beverages from key in-store locations affected consumption? So this is really a policy evaluation paper, which is in contrast to the work that Farasat presented, which was our joint work a couple of weeks ago, which was methodological. So the key aim of the policy, it's part of a sort of suite of policies that really aim to target obesity. So the Department of Health and Social Care and Public Health England call obesity the biggest long-term public health issue facing this country. In terms of statistics, approximately 30% of all adults in England are classed as clinically obese, and close to 2/3 are overweight. Why does this matter? Well, obesity has impact on, well, measures of well-being. So it increases mortality rates, it reduces life expectancy, and it reduces quality of life. It also has a sort of inequality perspective to it, in that the obesity prevalence of the most deprived 10% of children is approximately twice that of the least deprived 10%. And so if we want to estimate the costs of obesity, DHSC estimate that the direct costs of obesity and obesity-related illnesses such as heart disease, type 2 diabetes, and certain types of cancers directly cost the NHS approximately £6 billion at the moment, which is expected to rise to close to 10 billion by 2050. And then wider costs to society, which include things like absenteeism, reductions in productivity, are estimated to cost, I think this number is actually just for England, and it's estimated to cost around £27 billion annually. So how can you tackle obesity? Well, it's actually fairly simple, really. You either reduce consumption of sort of foods that are high in calories, fat, sugar, etc., and you increase physical activity. In an ideal world, policies to tackle obesity will combine both of them. So, you want to get adults doing around 30 minutes of physical exercise a day. You want to get children playing outside, but you also want to reduce the consumption of what we call foods high in fat, sugar, or salt, abbreviated to HFSS, which contribute disproportionately to obesity and the related conditions I mentioned. So an example of such a policy is the soft drinks industry levy, more commonly referred to as the sugar tax, which put a tax on beverages that have more than 5 grams of sugar per 100 millilitres of liquid. So that came in 2018, and I might talk a little bit about the results of that later. Our policy that we're talking about today adds to this, and it, in the kind of official government speak, legislates to end the placement of these HFSS foods in prominent locations intended to encourage purchasing both online and in physical stores in England only. So that's quite important. It doesn't apply to Scotland, Wales, or Northern Ireland. It's just solely in England. The policy does apply both online and in physical stores, as it states there. We concentrate on physical stores in this paper, and again, I'll explain why a little bit later. So what are the in-store restrictions more specifically? Well, the policy came into effect in England on the 1st of October 2022, so a little over a year ago now. And the location restriction policy, which I'll typically refer to as the policy from here on in, restricts the placement of these HFSS products in certain areas of a store for stores that are 185.8 meters squared or 2,000 square foot equivalent of greater or relevant floor area, which basically means the stuff that consumers can actually buy in. So it doesn't include the warehouse at the back of the store. And the areas within the store that are limited are any area within 2 meters of the checkout facility, any area within 2 meters of a designated queuing area or queue management system, the ends of aisles, store entrances, and covered external areas. And at this point, I should point out that alongside the location policy, a ban on volume promotions was also due to be introduced at the same time. And by volume promotions, we mean things like buy one, get one free, 3 for 2 offers. However, that policy has been postponed at least twice that I'm aware of, and is currently due to come in October 2025, I think. The problem that we have for our analysis is that Tesco and Sainsbury's, who are 2 of the largest supermarkets in this country, have both stated that they have voluntarily banned volume promotions from their stores as of the 1st of October, the same day as the location policy. Now, I contacted Tesco's corporate to ask whether this policy is actually in effect and how they're applying it. And they said yes, that the policy is an internal policy and that it applies UK-wide. But unfortunately, with our data, we don't really have a way of checking their implementation of the policy. We could sort of anecdotally check by visiting stores, but we don't know for sure whether they've applied it. We don't know the consistency, and obviously there's no ramifications for them if they were to chop and change their application of the policy. So I just want to make you aware there might be some confoundedness, but just to kind of state that up front. Our research question is more specific than HFSS products. We focus on drinks, so we ask, has the government's restrictions on location promotions reduced the consumption of high sugar drinks in England in favour of healthier options? And we focus on drinks for 2 reasons. The first is that from a public health perspective, the sugar from drinks is worse for you than sugar from foods. So I'm not a biologist, but I think it's to do with like metabolism, and also if you drink sugary drinks, it makes you hungrier, so you eat more sugary foods. So it makes sense for them to target drinks in general as a first option. The second reason is that the definition of what a treated or untreated product is from a policy perspective is much clearer for drinks. So the definition is the same as the sugar tax, actually, in that anything with added sugar, and that added is quite important, that anything with added sugar above 5 grams per 100 millilitres is classed as a sugar-sweetened beverage and is not able to be sold in the parts of the store that I mentioned earlier. So the key is that the beverage has to be sugar sweetened, so naturally occurring sugars in juices, for example, or smoothies are not counted, and those products are exempt from the policy. When it comes to other HFSS products, the manufacturer and the retailer are supposed to work together to define what is healthy and what is unhealthy. And so there's some ambiguity there. So we don't have a clear indication from our product set what could be affected and what's not affected. Sean?
Yeah, have there been reduced sales, special offers on these drinks introduced at the same time that we might not be fully aware of?
When you say special offers?
I just noticed that in my Tesco, it's very rare to see Coca-Cola Original on sale. But the alternative Coca-Colas are frequently on sale.
Right.
And that, don't think was the case 3 or 4 years ago. It was a
Right,
different
so that would be a potential example of the volume ban, volume promotion ban coming into place, because that would only count for the regular Coke, but not the Coke Zero. So if they're not doing sales or offers on that, it could be that Tesco are.
But even if they're not doing sales offers on a single bottle, that would not be covered by the volume ban.
Right, that wouldn't be, yes. There isn't a policy currently that specifically says you're not allowed to reduce the price of these HFSS products, but there's potentially stuff happening internally with these supermarkets because they're kind of trying to shift purchases away. So I don't know is the answer.
Can I just interrupt right now and suggest and ask if there could be a slightly different research question, which it would be to say in favor of low sugar drinks instead of healthier options?
Yes.
Because I think there's a question about whether people are being pushed into more cancer-causing sugar sweetener options, and so
Yes.
healthier is not obvious.
That's a fair point. Yes, less sugar is probably a more appropriate way of describing it. So in terms of the literature that we place ourselves in, it's primarily in this kind of growing area of evaluating policies to combat what we call sin goods here, and that usually refers to alcohol and cigarettes, but you kind of expand the definition to include consumption goods with negative externalities associated in terms of health. And the current papers typically evaluate taxation, which is the usual policy tool that is used for these goods, and also the associated welfare implications. So in this field, Rachel Griffith and her team from the IFS are among the most prominent authors, and so they've published a couple of papers, in fact more than a couple of papers, on tax design in the alcohol market. So what's the optimal design and the social and welfare implications based on demographics for tax in the alcohol market. There's also been some papers looking at sodas and sugar-sweetened beverages. So this first paper by, I can't pronounce this author's name, but this is from a medical journal. Sorry? Ioscov. So it's from a medical journal where a few years ago, between 2013 and 2017, some supermarkets in the UK self-imposed a ban on confectionery at the checkout for a few months at a time. I'm not sure about the background of why they did that, but they did, which lent itself to a natural experiment. And so they found that that banning confectionery from the checkouts did reduce their sales somewhat. But there was some confoundedness because they weren't sure where consumers necessarily picked up the products. Franco.
So if I go on the distinction between the alcohol consumption versus the sugar,
Yes.
the alcohol, you're taxing the alcohol, but the sugar, you're not taxing the sugar. You're taxing only the sugar when it's in the drinks.
Right.
And the question if it's sugar if it is the sugar that is bad, like the alcohol was bad, is why not taxing the sugar? No, I don't think. I don't think that the sugar. The tax is on the sugar. It's on the drinks that you get the tax, but not.
But
on
it's
the
also,
sugar.
you can say then the same thing about alcohol.
Even the VAT might be different, on sugar versus the sugar beverage that you pay.
Why do they tax sugar as a product specifically?
Yes, yeah, because you're targeting sugar here, but then at the end you're saying the real problem is the beverages, so we're targeting the beverages. And
Right.
sugar in the
No,
beverages.
they're not taxing sugar. They tax the soft drink.
Yes, understand that. Yeah, based on the
If
sugar
it has a
content.
lot of sugar in
Yeah,
it.
understand. But the question is, the sugar is the bad, basically,
But I guess that
as you did with the alcohol. The alcohol was the bad problem. You're
all
taxing the alcohol.
the kind
But you
of all
can't say
sugars
that-
are not the same. And when sugar is in the drinks, it's much worse. So I think that's why for example, that's why we focused on it. In terms of taxation, in general, the reason that I also think that's the reason why they've started with beverages, and that, you know, you don't necessarily pay the same equivalent tax on cupcakes or whatever. So it's not the sugar, it's the type of sugar. Griffith and Dubois have also looked at sugar taxes, but mostly in terms of the types of policies that we could use to reduce consumption of these, particularly with regards to children as well. So they talk about reducing advertising during daytime television and that sort of thing. This paper here by Fern et al. Is by Andrew Fern of the Business School and includes Peter Moffat of the School of Economics, where they use, in fact, the same database that we use, but from a different time period, to look at the effects of the sugar tax. So the sugar tax is a producer tax, but they find that there's a lot of pass-through to consumers. They find that also companies across this period have switched recipes to move away from being taxed to being untaxed. And ultimately what's happened in the 5 and a bit years since the sugar tax is the amount of sugar in drinks has been reduced, I think, by something like 450,000 grams. So there's been significant amounts of sugar removed by this reformulation exercise that firms have undertaken. And then the final set of papers is evaluation of non-tax policy. So Farasat has a paper looking at volume promotion bans on alcohol in Scotland. And that paper finds that there's some unintended consequences of that policy, whereby the heaviest drinkers actually increase their consumption. So that's just something to keep in mind when thinking about these types of policies. So whilst location restriction policies have been used in alcohol and cigarettes around the world, this policy here in England is the first to be so wide-ranging in its target of HFSS products. And so its success is relevant to the producers and retailers, obviously, but consumers, to the UK government, and of course other nations that might be looking to implement similar policies. So we make some kind of high-level predictions. The null hypothesis that the location policy has no effect, which would mean that the quantity of sugar-sweetened beverages consumed is unchanged as a result of the policy. The first hypothesis is that the policy is successful, and here I make a sort of subtle distinction about what might constitute success. So perhaps in a perfect world, the government would want the absolute quantity of sugar-sweetened beverages consumed to decrease as a result of the policy. But that might be asking quite a lot. So they might constitute success if the rate of growth of SSBs is slower than the rate of growth of non-SSBs, which would indicate that we are switching away from sugary drinks to less sugary drinks. Of course, a third option is that there are unintended consequences similar to what I described in Farasat's paper. For example, the quantity of SSBs consumed could actually increase as a result of the policy. And you might think, well, how could that happen? One potential explanation that we thought of is that if you imagine that these goods are highly inelastic in demand and have low cross elasticities, to the point where if you want a Coke is the only thing that will do. Diet Coke, Coke Zero is no good. So you go into a store and you want a 500 ml bottle of Coke, but now it's no longer available at the front of the store or near the checkouts or where you might normally get it. But you go hunting for the bottle of Coke and you find it at the back of the store. But now at that point in the back of the store, there are other sort of multi-packs of Coke, maybe 4 times 500 or some 6-pack of cans or even 2-liter bottles or whatever, and you make the decision, well, that's actually better value for money. I could buy some more cans, have one now, keep the rest for later. And so you actually end up purchasing more. Now, we're not necessarily saying that is what happens, but it's a possibility that we considered. We can make some sort of predictions based on evidence from other products as well. So if we look at tobacco in Scotland, where they do have a location restriction policy, it's been successful in reducing the visibility of the product and also reducing sales of tobacco as well. Looking more at other HFSS products, a market research company called REAP published some headline figures for some HFSS products. Now, the report is behind a paywall, so I haven't been able to see what their data set is. I don't know what their methodology is, so I can just report these headline figures. But they found that unhealthy crisp sales increased 17% in the 6 months post-restriction, and healthier, in inverted comma, crisp sales were down 12%. And they put this down primarily to price effects, because the unhealthy crisps are on average 18 pence more expensive. And so they suggest that the price effects supersede the kind of inconvenience of the location policy. On the flip side, healthier cereals, their sales were up nearly 34%. And that's largely as a result of the reformulation, similar to what happened with drinks 5 years ago. High in sugar cereals have reduced their sugar content, so they're now below threshold and not affected by the policy. So, as I said, that's something which we think has happened for the most part for drinks and isn't really something that would happen. Yeah.
I was just thinking about the price effect in the crisps.
Mm-hmm.
The price went up when at the same time as the policy came. Did the price go up at the same time as the policy came in? And might you? I'll just finish the question, so to speak. Then you could just leave it if you want. But might the same thing have happened with yours? And was that something you looked at?
So unfortunately, because this paper is kind of paper, I have no idea exactly what they did. I'm just reporting their kind of headline numbers. I'd love to see what they did to analyze it better and compare it with our.
But might there be price effects also
Absolutely.
that happen with this policy that might drive in that direction?
Absolutely.
So that's kind of a more general question.
Yes.
So packaging has changed a lot. For example, if you come back to the crisps example, is you can go to the supermarket. It's very hard now to find a single bag of crisps. You have to buy, the family pack, the huge one. Depends on the type of supermarket that you go.
Right.
So I'm assuming that this is possible to control for the different packages that is available, because all the story that follows is based on if I cannot find the small unit anymore, then I have no choice to either buy the big one or not.
Right. So
The supply effect.
in our data, we have a variable which we call single pack or multi-pack.
Yeah, but that's the multi-pack. I can tell you, even coming back on the Coke, I get the 6, the 4, then you get the 6, then 12, and I cannot find the 6. I got to buy. I had to break the 12 in 2 to get the 6 now. So
Right.
that's the thing.
And also, we measure quantity as quantity in liters as well. So we do kind of try and take into account some of that. Obviously, as you say, a 12 pack is different to a 6 pack. So we try and take that into account as best we can. So that's a good segue into the data, actually. The data that we use is obtained from Dunnhumby's Tesco sales database, which includes weekly sales by store type, by country in the UK, and life stage, which is Tesco's own demographic classification for their club card customers. So Tesco has approximately 27% market share in the UK, and 80% of Tesco sales are to club card customers. And the database is created using a random 20% sample of these club card customers. Tesco sales are split approximately 88% physical, 12% online. So the online sales are not insignificant, but the kind of mechanism of the policy action is slightly different because it's based on kind of search optimization. And so there's definitely work that can be done in that area, but I think that's probably deserves more attention than we could give it when we're looking at both things. So we focus on physical stores, but that's not to say that online should be ignored. The raw sample contains 113 weeks of observations on over 2,500 SKUs. And SKUs is a stock keeping unit, which refers to a product size combination. So 6 times 330 cans is different to 12 times 330 cans is different to a 2 litre bottle, etc. And the data set includes information on sales units and sales value, which is revenue, but not transactional price. And in addition, we calculate quantity in litres of each SKU, which is equal to the volume of an individual item times by the number of items. So 4 times 500 millilitres is equal to 2 litres. And then price, we have to calculate as the revenue generated by the SKU divided by the quantity in litres to obtain a price per litre. So our identification strategy simply wants to compare the pre and post policy changes in the logs of quantity, price, and revenue. And we use logs for 2 reasons. The first, as I'll show in a second, is that the scales, particularly when it comes to quantity between SSBs and non-SSBs, is quite significantly different. So when it comes to comparing the two, for example, if we were to draw a graph, the SSB line would almost be flat. It's not very informative. So by taking the logs, we're able to see more the movements in sales. And also, when it comes to interpretation, we can interpret the coefficients as percentage changes. So I think that's a bit more intuitive than looking at raw sales figures, which can be quite large and not necessarily very informative. So the basic difference in difference model we use, we have an indicator for whether it's a sugar-sweetened beverage, S. We have a dummy variable, B, for before and after the policy. We have the interaction term, which is our variable of interest, beta 3. And then we have a vector of additional covariates, which include things like seasonality dummies, which include year dummies, some interaction terms, and other regressors that we put in there. I just want to highlight the I subscript, which, depending on the level of aggregation, either means skew, or it could mean, at the highest level of aggregation, there's 2 groups, SSB, non-SSB. The control group we use in our initial estimates are non-SSBs in England, and we assume that the kind of common diff and diff assumptions of common trends, no anticipation, and binary and static treatment effects, which means that the treatment happened at the same time for all treated goods, and there weren't any differential effects over time. So here's a few graphs that show the trends using the raw data, and I'll sort of quickly walk through each one in turn. SSBs are in orange, non-SSBs are in blue, and if we look at price, particularly from the period the 1st of January 2022 onwards, the lines are kind of both steadily increasing. They both have a kind of gentle positive slope. Looks like they're increasing in parallel up to the red line, which is the date of the policy. So just by eyeballing, it looks like there are some common pre-trends. The same can be said of both quantity and revenue. We suggest that, again, there's like a gentle slope from the 1st of January to around the summer of 2022, when there's these kind of double spikes, and then a small reduction before the policy date. And again, in revenue, tells a similar story. If we look post-January 2022, a gentle positive slope, a couple of spikes around the summer, and then a slight decrease before the policy. So purely by eyeballing, it looks like there are some common pre-trends. And so we proceed with our difference in difference model. There are a couple of challenges with the data. And the first is we can't guarantee which of the smaller stores in Tesco's portfolio are actually subject to the policy. So if you remember at the start, I said the policy only applies to stores that have square footage greater than 2,000. Now, all these large stores are definitely over 2,000 square foot in size. But some of the smaller stores, the petrol and the express stores, are not necessarily over 2,000 square foot. We can't say for certain. Some of them will be, some of them won't be. We tried to look at Tesco's own internal data, but they just give mean figures, and the mean area for these store types is 2,150 square feet. So it's pretty much around the cutoff. So it's not particularly helpful. When we look at the total sales of drinks, which is this first row here, we can see that petrol stations account for virtually no sales, but express stores account for 17% of all drink sales. So we can't just ignore them from our sample completely. When we look at the percentage of sugar-sweetened beverages compared to non-SSBs, you can see that there's only a small percentage of SSBs sold in total, only 7%. But when you look at the proportion of sales in express, extra, and superstores, the 2% here is not that far different to the 2.5% in these stores. This accounts for about 25% of all SSB sales. So again, we can't completely ignore express stores. So what we end up doing is we're comfortable dropping petrol stations from our analysis. They're small, there's a large number of zeros in their sales, which is problematic, but we're not comfortable dropping these. So instead we do subgroup analyses, one where we just look at the large stores and another where we include express stores. For the most part in this presentation, I'm going to talk about the large stores because they're the most stable results and the ones that we can more confidently make conclusions from. But I will show you some results that include the express stores as well. Also, there's a large number of SKUs and there's frequent churn in this industry, which means that products come, all products are discontinued, and this kind of creates a selection problem. The menus are changing, and it certainly impacts our results, and it's something that we do want to consider. But for our first set of estimations, we want to consider a stable set of products. So we consider products that only appeared both before and after the policy according to the database, and we leave selection issues for some later analysis, which we haven't completed yet. We also look only at SKUs that contribute to the top 95% of cumulative sales, and this helps to make the data set a little bit more manageable. But also we feel that keeping this top 95% is actually what the policy is targeting. It's not targeting some drink that only sells 1 litre every week in one store. It wants to target the Cokes and the Pepsis of this world. Sorry, Sean, did you have a question?
No, but after you're done with this slide.
Okay. So once we remove the bottom 5%, we are left with 471 SKUs, 30 of which are SSBs, 441 of which are non-SSBs. And then the final thing that we do to the data is we create the largest window we can around the policy event, and then we take a similar window from the previous year to capture seasonal and year effects. So our policy period is from May 2022 to February 2023, that's 44 weeks. And then the pre-policy year includes the same 44 weeks exactly a year previously.
If you go back to the prior slide, it looks like about 12% of, in the express stores, SSBs are about 12% of sales, if I've understood the numbers right. And in the superstores, they're more like 6%. Is that right, or did I misunderstand?
Sorry.
Then out of the, is that right?
It seems right with, yes.
Yeah, okay. It's 2.5 divided by 40 is about 6 or something like that. And the 1.99 figure divided by 16 is about 12%. So,
Right.
So the express stores have a way higher percentage of sales of the SSBs.
Right.
Stores. You're gonna go to that, I imagine. Is that right?
Yes, that is right. And so that's why we don't want to discount express stores. So that's why we include them in the analysis, in parts of the analysis going forward. So we primarily prefer the fully aggregated level estimations because they're the most stable currently. We're working on trying to stabilize the other ones, but I'll talk about why the SKU level results aren't particularly stable. But when we aggregate them, we end up having a long panel. So we have a small n, which is only 2 SSBs and non-SSBs, and a large T. So we have to account for serial correlation. And so we include an AR1 process in the preceding results. And obviously we're interested in quantity because that's the most important outcome from a public health perspective. But we're also interested in the effects on price because we want to understand the mechanism of quantity changes, and reformulation is one option for producers, but changing price in response to the policy is another response that producers and retailers can take. So we want to see what happens in that regard. And finally, as a kind of third potential effect, we look at the effects on revenue, which is obviously specific to Tesco, but you know, it's not a great step to look at that. So we include that in our analysis. So here is a graph of yearly comparisons. And again, sugar sweetened beverages are in orange, non-sugar sweetened beverages are in blue. The solid line is the policy year. The dashed line is the pre-policy year, and the vertical red line represents the date or the week of the policy in the policy year. So if you look at price to begin with, the top left column, post the policy, there is an increase in price of both SSBs and non-SSBs. But if you look at the orange line, it sort of plateaus quickly. There's a dip in the gray, I don't know if you can see the gray area, but this sort of area in each column represents December, which is the period where there's the kind of most difference, if you like, between the products. And so there's this drop in December, and then it stabilizes again at around the same level pre-December. For non-SSBs, there's a small spike around Christmas time, and then a drop, and then it seems to settle again at the same level as pre-Christmas. Is there a big effect there that you can see eyeballing? Perhaps not, I would say. If there is an effect, it looks like it's small, but it's hard to say specifically. What you can say is that something strange happened in the pre-policy year, around October of that year, which we tried to account for using year effects. I think this was pandemic lockdown period, so perhaps that's an explanation. When we look at price and revenue, though, in the post period, both lines look fairly flat up until Christmas, where there is a spike, a bigger spike, albeit in SSBs, and then a decline, and they settle around or maybe a bit less than the pre-Christmas periods. And again, with revenue, it's difficult to say whether there's any drastic changes in the post period. The lines are fairly parallel before Christmas. Again, there's this spike, and then they settle maybe a bit lower, but eyeballing, we don't see drastic changes from the post-policy period. But we can look at the actual regressions themselves. And so this model obviously includes our interaction term, which is after SSB. It's our variable of interest, and so that's why I've included at the top. All of these models also include 43 weak dummies to account for seasonality. We also include 43 interaction dummies between the weak variable and SSB to allow for different effects between SSBs and non-SSBs at every week. And then we also include a year dummy, which which is 0 for the pre-policy year and 1 for the policy year. And initially, I want to focus on the first 3 columns, which look at quantity, price, and revenue respectively in large stores only. So we see a negative but insignificant value on quantity. The price is 4.3% greater than for SSBs in the after period than if they were not treated in the after period, and there isn't a significant change in revenue either. So this result suggests that price went up, but quantity and revenue were unaffected, which is kind of a strange result, because you would expect if price went up and sales to stay the same, revenue to go up as well. But we see a similar result in price, but actually now revenue does go up when we include the express stores in the sample. So perhaps this is more what we might expect from theory, that price has gone up, but sales are the same, so revenue should go up. But we still want to do a bit more work in trying to figure out what's happening with these express stores, how many of them are affected, and so on. Including these 43 SSB weak dummies, we justify because the chi-squared of these joint significance is significant in every instance. And when we look at plotting the coefficients of those interaction terms, so this graph shows in red the coefficients and in blue the 95% confidence intervals. For quantity, we see some significance around the 32-week mark, which is Christmas. Sorry, 35-week mark, which is Christmas. When we look at the same in terms of price, we see a lot of significance in the post period. So we feel that including all these interaction terms is the right way to go, although we have estimated models without them as well. One other thing that we do is that we separately analyze single products and multi-products. So we define single products as bottles or cans that are less than or equal to 500 mils, and anything else is a multi-pack, because a single 2-litre bottle of Coke is not like a kind of impulse purchase. And it's really trying to proxy for that. We try to proxy for front of store, back of store. It's not an ideal proxy, but it is probably a better proxy for impulse versus more considered spending. And in the large stores, we now see a significant reduction in sales of around 12% than if they weren't treated, an increase in price, and a corresponding decrease in revenue for single products, which seems to suggest that if the policy is targeting impulse purchases, well, then it's reduced the sales of these impulse purchases, at least in large stores. And so you could argue that that constitutes a success for the policy. It doesn't seem to affect the sales of multi-packs so much, despite the fact that price has gone up. We don't see a change in revenue. So, people don't seem to be as bothered by this store location thing for multi-packs. We can also look at the same for the all stores, including Express, and that the significant result for sales now disappears in single products. And we're back to the similar result that we saw in the baseline regressions, where price has significantly gone up, but sales, well, the quantity and revenue are unaffected, which does seem a strange result, and definitely something that we'd like to kind of investigate a little bit further. Before I finish, I do want to quickly show some SKU level results. These are just for large stores only. I don't want you to pay too much attention to the numbers per se, but I'm showing these to illustrate the kind of instability in the results as they are currently. So none of the numbers are significant, But if you look at this value in column 1 for quantity, the coefficient is negative 0.314, which would suggest that quantity has gone down by 31%. Now that seems highly unrealistic, and it seems to be, it's affected by a large proportion of zero sales. So you can see here, the N for quantity is different by about 2,000 to the N for price and revenue. And that's because of zero observations in quantity. When we have a zero observation, we're unable to calculate price and revenue. So they are dropped from these regressions. But this is not econometrically sound, obviously, but it's just a kind of check. When we do drop those zero observation quantities, the coefficient changes from positive to negative and is now at 0.115. So clearly just doing that has a big effect. And so we know the zeros are playing some part and we want to take them into account. This just doesn't do that sufficiently well. We can also add the single multi-dummies to the regression, and it makes almost no difference. It does make a small difference, but when you do the rounding, it makes no difference to the values in the previous slide. So it doesn't seem to affect that in this model specification. So what are the adjustments that we are continuing to do in the paper? We want to look at dynamic changes in treatment effects. This usually means either the policy takes time to kick in. I don't think that's the case in this instance. I think it's more that maybe the initial effects take some time to take effect. We want to do a two-step model for sample selection at the SKU level. So something like conditioned on a positive sale. Does the policy have an effect on quantity? We want to do some subsample analysis by life stage, and as soon as the baseline regressions are stable, that's a relatively easy thing to do. And the final thing I want to mention, because you might have thought of it, is we could have used SSBs in the other home nations as a control group, because the policy only applies in England, not to Scotland, Wales, and Northern Ireland, but we have similar policy. Distribution costs are reasonably constant across certainly mainland Great Britain. Culturally, in terms of taste, demographics, they make good controls. And it would enable us to split the effect of the location policy with any voluntary voluntary volume promotion ban. But that potential triple difference is affected by potential price parity across the UK. So there's no official policy of price parity, but if you ask or do the analysis like we have, you'll find that price parity exists to a certain extent within store types. So if you go to a Tesco Express and buy a bottle of Coke, 500 in Scotland or Norwich or London, it should be the same according to that price parity policy. If you do the same in a Tesco Extra store, across those three locations, it should be the same. And the data bears that out. So the top row is Scotland, the bottom row is Northern Ireland. The sort of black line you can't really see particularly well is the 45-degree line. If there's exact price parity, points would lie exactly on that line. But because we only observe transactional prices, and there might be different take-up of offers, I've allowed for a 5 and a 10% leeway in prices, denoted by the pink and the grey bit, which I don't think you can see. And most of the points lie on or near the line. In fact, 85% of prices in Scotland, 85% of prices in Northern Ireland, and 87% of prices in Scotland are within 5% of each other. So we think price parity is going on, and so it makes measuring the price effects very difficult, because there's going to be spillover effects driven by prices in England, because England is by far and away the largest of the markets in the home nation, and that's going to drive prices. So we can't, or rather we choose not to use Scotland as a control. And then finally, I actually did a probit this morning, so I just added this at the end, but I worked out that using a model with the same regressors as the baseline regressions, we get an average marginal effect on that interaction term of negative 0.44 for the probability of a positive sale. And it's highly significant as well, which means that the probability of a positive sale is much lower in the post period for SSBs. And it seemingly confirms that this idea that lots of zero sales are affecting our SKU level results. So this is the first step that we would do to do a two-step model. And that result is a positive step in that direction. So I think that's all I've got to say. Thanks very much and open to questions.
To what extent are these soft drink or these high sugar drinks sold in a bundle with other things, or mentally in a bundle? So I could imagine that, okay, fine, you just put all the sugar drinks somewhere else and then you sell crisps. And then they're all going to run from the soft drinks.
So that's a good question. Meal deals is a particular issue with that, and so we don't know how Tesco allocates sales and prices, etc., in a meal deal combination. We don't have data to know, how many meal deals were sold. It's certainly a consideration, something that we thought of, but we haven't been able to answer
You
that.
could look at just look at crisp sales at the same time, so just give us the same graph. Crisps, something should happen to junk food at the same time.
Right, yes, we could.
So
We
that
could
would
do
be
that.
fairly straightforward.
We could do that.
The other thing, you said a little bit about it in the beginning, but it takes time, but it's sort of what is the level of innovation?
Sorry, say that again?
What is the level of innovation? I mean, one of the weird things that we haven't seen with beer, that they changed the tax structure so that low alcohol beer is not just can be taxed.
Mm.
You go to the beer festival, try to find a low alcohol beer, good luck. There's hardly any under 4%. Actually, they seem to have gone up rather than down, which is totally the wrong direction. So are we, there we haven't seen the innovation that one might have hoped for. I think they were hoping for that there was more drinks that had a better health features.
Right.
But have we seen an innovation into drinks that are using products that are naturally sweeter and so they don't add as much sugar, because surely it's the added sugar that's the problem. So if you have something that is naturally horrendously sweet, then that's cool.
Right, so that's an excellent question. And fruit juices are actually very, very high naturally in sugar. So often, if you look at the sugar content of a pure orange juice, that might actually have a higher sugar content than a regular Coke. And some commentators suggested, well, that's still sugar and it's still bad for you. So I think it was George Osborne that suggested extending this tax to all drinks. But then juices do have other positive benefits, and what producers have been arguing is that for us to remove the sugar from a juice, that becomes very expensive, and that would be passed on to consumers. So the innovations that have taken place have just been to reformulate sugar drinks. So for example, the latest kind of holdout was Pepsi, and Pepsi has recently been reformulated from over 10 grams of sugar per 100 milliliters to 4.7 grams of sugar plus some sweeteners. So it's now fallen below the threshold. And many of the remaining products are Coke products. Whether they eventually succumb, I don't know. But looking at the data, Coke still is very popular, still sold in good numbers. So from the kind of perspective of the Coca-Cola company, there's not a great deal of incentive for them to innovate, because despite all these policies, their product is still extremely popular.
So I'm a little bit worried about the disaggregation level that you have in the comparison, because in principle, we are comparing this SSB, if you want, before and after, and non-SSB before and after. But what's taking place within, say, suppose there's only one supermarket, Tesco, okay? And that supermarket, Tesco, is changing the compositions of the two products, the packaging of the two products in a different way, okay? And it could even be a reaction of the policy, for example. Then at that point, your comparison before and after that you're doing, even if you want, even difference, it does fail there, you know. And I wonder if you could, for example, take the 6-can, product and just study that and show the results with that, okay? Because that's a 6-can, it's being before, it's being after.
That's what he's doing. That is what he's doing. He's holding the products the same. We're not changing the composition of the products. That was the
But
first
this
thing he said.
aggregation, then I don't understand. You're doing a time series there.
No, but the churn rate he's already controlled for. He's not letting he's selected the SKUs. He said that it's the same SKUs before and after. We're not changing the composition.
It is the same SKU.
It's exactly the same SKUs that we're following, precisely for that worry, because we were worried about that. We still want to address that question as well, which links in with Morton's issue of innovation, because there's a certain different types of products being introduced and going out and so on. But right now, he's doing exactly what you're asking.
Okay, then I didn't say I was the same SKU, because when you're doing several aggregations, I thought you were just taking an aggregated product there.
No, we're keeping this the same set of SKUs before and after the policy for that reason.
Yeah.
And then aggregating it up in the aggregate analysis.
Yes. So then the only matter that there will be, but that nothing you can do if the store reallocate the position of the products. That's
Right, I mean,
you cannot control for everything. Yeah.
check.
So for your control group, how likely is it that once the policy was imposed, consumers shifted to the non-SSB products?
How likely is that?
Yeah, I mean, wouldn't consumers, when they don't see their sugary beverages available where they expect them to be, they find a nearby non-sugary beverage?
Yeah.
And wouldn't that cause spillovers into your estimates? Because they're your control. In other words, that wouldn't have been what their quantity trend would have been if there was no policy. In other words, wouldn't the quantities consumed be just moved on to the non-SSB products?
You're saying that there's like a fixed quantity of drink and it just switches from.
It's diversion ratio. That's what you want.
Right. So wouldn't that be an issue if, let's say, there is some level of substitutability between some of the non-SSBs and the SSBs? And yeah.
It's a good question. I have to think about that a little bit more.
So maybe one way is you mentioned possible triple differences.
Yeah.
You said that on the price regressions, you might not be able to do that, but if you do a triple difference on quantity, would that be a better way to try and estimate the effect of the policy on consumption?
I don't know necessarily off the top of my head whether it would be necessarily better. I'd have to think more about that. Sorry, I can't give a better answer right now, but I need to think about that.
I think same problem applies there as well. Because the problem is that what his results are showing is we thought that price and location are, if you think of that as two different policies, two different strategies that Tesco can employ, where to place the product in the store and what price to offer it at. We thought that, or at least I thought that if you can no longer produce it at the front of the store, you put it in the back, but you're going to drop the price of that product. But now there's a price parity between here and Scotland. So if you drop the price here and you want to maintain the same price in Scotland, you're going to have a lower price in Scotland as well. So now if we look at the quantity in Scotland, which is what you're suggesting in a triple difference, that quantity in Scotland is reacting to the changed price in Scotland, which is coming due to price parity in England. So it creates that same contamination effect over there as well. So if we don't get identification here, we're not going to get it there either unfortunately. We'll still have to think about some other way of resolving that problem, because what you're pointing to is a legitimate
The
issue.
price is the same for the same products all throughout the country.
That was the 45-degree lines he was showing, that they are typically for a given
By law.
SKU.
Is it by law that they have to sell at the same price?
There was a 2000 CMA advisory sent out to lots of retail stores saying you must have the same products. Whether it was ever enforced or not is not clear because it never became a law. But I think stores started doing these type of things, and the data seems to show that they do have the same prices.
Okay, thank you very much. I just want to end on the hour, and then we can keep our conversation going, but we need to end now. So one more big thank you. And yeah, let's continue.